best way to start would be by revenues, everybody's favorite.
Can you speak a little louder?
Sure. Is that better?
A little louder.
Okay. Sorry, this is about as good as it gets for me.
All right.
Unless we're on a football field, that's totally different. Okay, so our revenues are coming in for the period at $14,924,402, which is 75% collected versus the prior year at $13,592,190.88, which was at 72% at this point last year. So the difference of about $1,300,000. In terms of, so I'll just say that's a good thing, generally speaking, if you're doing better in revenue generation than you were the prior year. And to be honest, given where we were this time last year and as we were doing budgeting, who knew? So we're feeling pretty good about this, actually. Skipping to the enterprise special revenue fund expenses, we're at 32% versus 35% prior year spend. So we're, depending on how you look at it, we're 3% better than we were last year in terms of our expenditures for the period. Similar situation with general fund expenses at 31% for the period versus 34% in the prior year. Some highlights, IT spending is slightly higher than the prior year, in part due to greater than anticipated PC failures and subsequent replacements in the fire and the police departments. Typically, to highlight that a little bit, typically you're trying to look at anywhere from 3 to 5 year replacement time, and some of these machines were, well, many of the machines were way over that. So I had planned in a certain amount, but I didn't expect things to just die the way they did in those two departments. Code enforcement, that's a bit higher than the prior year due to Mike Hoffman's departure, and he's been temporarily replaced with a contractor until the permanent replacement is hired. And then the insurance P&L expenses are lower than anticipated due to a premium holiday, which we weren't anticipating, and in part due to the pandemic. So that's another positive for us to report. Generally speaking, I mean, it's been a fairly typical year in terms of expenditures, but we're only at period 3. And that's pretty much it. There really aren't any other highlights.
The PC failures, does that come out of capital reserves or out of the general budget?
No, it comes out of the IT budget. Typically, I'm using the new equipment line for that.
That's a general line, or is that a?
Yeah, general fund line in the MIS budget.
What do they normally allocate for that?
Well, last year I think I put in 14,000 for that, and anticipating I knew that we were going to be doing a lot of changes for the networking gear as well as both Wi-Fi and switching technology, plus we were going to be doing some other upgrades to PCs. And then the server, we did go in and tap the capital reserve for that. All of that technology was woefully old, and to the point where some of the switches were 15 years old, and so we were encountering port failures on a regular basis, and running around trying to figure out why in the world they weren't working, and people were having lost connectivity to the network. So that little pod up there is a good example of some of the Wi-Fi technology that we changed as well. So both of them needed changing. And then, of course, the server was on its last legs. Two of the servers were on their last legs. So what we did was, I mentioned in here that we're monitoring expenses carefully and working to reduce costs. So an example of that in last year would be we virtualized the, when I purchased a new server, what we did was virtualize that server into multiple servers with VMware technology, and we were able to then turn a server into multiple, saving the organization money. It's not that I'm a genius. This is fairly commonly done. I mean, if you want to think I'm a genius, that's great. But the reality is many organizations do this now, so they can get maximum benefit out of every resource. So, but that was an example of where we were really looking to cut costs and in a good way. So, does that answer your question?
I assume
Exactly.
the next budget that we see, there's going to be some kind of increase in the line item?
No, actually, honestly, when this happened this year, I wish I had level funded and requested the same amount, because I dropped it to just over 12,000. So, like I said, I hadn't anticipated to have the number of failures that we had, but we're going to continue doing replacements throughout the year to get some of the older systems updated. And there are two reasons for that. One is just because I don't want to have continued failures for critical departments. But the other piece is that we're wanting to make sure that all the potential security problems are eliminated. So.
Is that
Not here particularly, but it's always an issue everywhere. Last year, another thing that we did was we went through an IT security audit just as the pandemic was. And so we got some really valuable information out of that, and we'd like to go through any audit. So this was, never a fun thing, because all they do is tell you all the things you're doing wrong. But then we had a list of things that we can work down against to make sure that we're securing ourselves. So an example of that would be we invested last year in VPN technology. And so fortunately, this is one of those weird twists of fate, if you will. Because of the pandemic, we were then we had cause to have people work off-site. And once that happened, we realized that our VPN technology just couldn't handle the demand put on it. Well, it was old and in need of replacement anyway. So by upgrading that, we were able to get additional user licenses and expanded security capability with that new Sonic Wall device is what we're using. So that was a good thing. And we're actually looking to do that. Increase that this year with another firewall device, essentially cordon off the water sewer area, because that's a particular area of vulnerability for not just our community, but many communities around the world. So they've been subject to numerous attacks, and so we're trying to make sure that we do what we can to secure that.
Any other questions?
Bill, on the revenue report, charges for services, a negative number, what causes that?
Let's see.
revenue report, charges for services. Revenues are negative $800.
Second.
Sure you want?
Yeah, fiscal '22.
Fiscal 20.
Charges for services is negative $881.15
Yes.
on year-to-date revenues.
For the period, yeah. Oh, boy, you know what? To be honest, I think that's, yeah, I didn't catch that because I think that's an error. So, I apologize for that oversight. That is so what Munis does, which is our finance system, when it does reporting, it reports all revenues in negative. And so when we create this report, generally I always go through it and make sure that we've removed the negatives for these reports, and I missed that one, so apologies. So we're not actually in a negative condition.
So
I'll double check that to make absolutely sure that I'm correct on this, but I'm pretty sure.
you're
I'm
saying that
correct.
should be a positive number?
Yes, it would be, so, I'm looking at a more detailed version, and I'm seeing it, and it comes down to ambulance receipts, and the ambulance receipts, I believe these year-to-date revenues should be higher
I
than
mean,
that.
yeah, there's
the
another
month to
negative
date is
in month to date.
$29,000.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Positive.
It doesn't-
Yeah, I'm looking at the year-to-date revenue, and that just can't be right, and it has to do with a negative number that's in there that shouldn't be. I'm pretty sure. That doesn't make sense.
Would you,
So, anyway, I have to double check that when I'm back in
Appreciate
the
that.
system, but I'm pretty sure it's my oversight for not having caught the negative in that column.
okay,
Because we don't get charged. In other words, we're making revenue on the ambulance receipts. So, but that's my mistake. Good catch.
Any other questions? While Bill is here, if you guys want to jump ahead in the agenda a bit to one of the items that we should discuss, and that's related to the question that we had for Steve related to grant information. I sent Steve the note, and Steve responded basically saying that he has no problem with Bill sharing grant information. It's really not really grant information, but really it's kind of like a project status. Right?
Right.
And my response was, that's fine. We will leave it up to Bill's discretion. If something new or something significant comes along, that he would then report that. There's no sense in him reporting the same information month after month. And the other caveat I said, unless there's some kind of special request or, from the budget. So,
okay.
everybody
So,
okay with that?
but as long as, what I was concerned about is that that's where things like COVID grants and so forth show up. And we need, I think that's important that we see that there be transparency for the public on the money that comes in from such activities. And then the question is how that money is spent.
Sure. I have no, obviously, sharing that information. I mean, they're public dollars. I have to report it to the state anyway, and or the federal government. So there's no problem sharing that with you. The one thing I would caution you is that it's, although I gave an example of where it helped us in the sense that we didn't have to spend general fund dollars on the purchase of a VPN device or a security device for our network. Much of that COVID dollars that came in under what was called Gopher and most of that money in general is very restricted in terms of what you can use it for. PPE, some overtime, and for first responders. They were really pushing cybersecurity and anything that would help promote distance work. So those kinds of things. And then similar for the FEMA expenditures. It was really mostly PPE related. So, I mean, it helped us in the sense that it prevented the town from going into negative and purchasing those kinds of things in their supply budgets. But they weren't, it was there because of, pandemic. So, but I have no problem sharing any of that information.
So, question on that? So is there a series of open grants right now where you have balances that are available to you that you have not spent?
The one grant that we've received, which is, and this is really, it's a town council decision as to how it gets spent, but that's the ARPA money. And you probably are aware that ARPA is being chopped up into 2 tranches, and every community is getting something. You got a chunk of that in for the first round, and it hasn't been decided exactly how it's going to be used at this point.
I mean, it might be helpful maybe next time just to see like a summary of what grants are there, how much money is sitting there that we haven't spent.
Sure.
Whether there's any way to try to impact our budget. If we see it, it's just helpful to know what's there.
Sure. Again, I'll just mention, you have to be very careful because, and in fact, this was the case with the FEMA and Gopher funding for the COVID pandemic. Was this can't be used to reduce your tax impact. So if that's what you're looking for, you're going to be sorely disappointed.
Yeah, no, I think it would be helpful to know what's going on, what's there.
Sure.
So it's visible to us.
Okay.
So, if I understand correctly, we asked for next time that Bill comes for the committee that he presents some information.
Bill would-
Yeah, there would be some summary of what's there. I mean, does that make sense?
Yes, fine with it. Send a reminder.
Sure.
Most of those funds are funds that are designated for something in particular, though. You've got to use them for X, Y, Z by a certain date, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the same with the COVID-related funds, that if you hadn't used them by a certain time period, you had to give them back.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Bill? Thank you, sir. Want to see you around? The next agenda item is calendar review. So I've sent everybody an updated calendar, just a couple of things. So the town manager said that we will have the budget on or before November 15th. I've tentatively scheduled for a Monday evening, November 29th, a review with the town manager and Bill to go over the new presented budget. Is everybody okay with that?
Yep.
We've done them sometime, if I'm not mistaken, on Saturdays in the past. So, I believe we can get it done on Monday night. We will get the budget, like I say, on before the 15th of November. I would ask that, everybody take a look at it. If you have any questions or whatever, that we develop some questions that we can give to the town manager before that meeting, and we'll break it up to 5.
When do we expect that we'll get a copy of that so we can,
We will have them by the 15th.
by the 15th?
November 15th. So that gives us 2 weeks to take a look at it. But,
Send the questions to you or to Steve?
Yeah, if you want to send them to me, we'll put them
Okay.
together. Like to, give him a good couple of days he may need to bring in, say, like the police chief or somebody. He may ask them to come as opposed to him trying to answer it. But most likely, I suspect that he would like to answer them. The other thing that I have, again, that's still tentative, is that the public hearing for the town would be on Monday night, January 3rd. And I'm pretty confident that the deliberative session, that the town actually does the voting. By law, that has to be between the first and second Saturdays of following the last Monday in January. So it's tentatively scheduled for Saturday, February 5th. Again, these are still tentative, pending the town manager and the town council approving them. But most likely those dates are going to stick. Questions, comments on the calendar? Next item on the agenda is the capital improvement program. Roger's put some stuff together.
Yeah. The first part of this information was distributed to you earlier. Just to review a little bit of what the process is basically that the committee, which is formed of members from the budget committee, the planning, from school, and from the town council. The committee hears from the department heads their requests for capital acquisition or capital use for a 6-year program. This is the only time that we do a look ahead of 6 years rather than just an annual review. And it's a time for the department heads to, make a forecast of what they think they're going to need in terms of capital monies. Capital acquisitions are funded, have historically been funded out of the capital reserves. And the budget each year provides for a money to be put into capital reserves. Oftentimes that money is put in and taken out in the same year. Revolving fund, but oftentimes money is put in and held so that it accumulates. And the idea being that capital acquisitions further down the road can be funded out of the reserve fund. Unfortunately, the reserve funds have always been underfunded. The requests for reserve for capital monies are typically funded only at the 25 to 30% level. In other words, if $1 million is requested, the town council put in $250,000, $300,000 into reserves. The bottom line on that is that the solution has always been to basically, we'd say that the lifetime of this truck is 10 years, but we push it to 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years before we actually replace it. But as one of the kind of so-called solutions to this is that the town is moving towards leasing equipment. So if you don't have the money to buy the $100,000 plow truck, you go out and lease it and pay, $20,000 a year for 5 years on a lease, basically a full payout lease that says at the end of the lease, we own the equipment. Because the town cannot be committed to years 2, 3, 4, and 5 of that lease, it's required that that lease have what's called a non-appropriation clause, which says that the lease can be canceled if the town does not appropriate the money in subsequent years to fund the lease. So it's not a commitment that's being made because by law, the town can't make that a long-term commitment. They have to go into a bonding process in order to make a longer-term commitment. What the CIP committee dealt with this year was that since the capital reserves have always been underfunded, and we are now leasing equipment which essentially says you can't underfund the lease payment or you're going to lose your equipment. So that's not terribly obvious as the CIP people as we looked at the process that's being used. And so in addition to the information that I gave you earlier, this is a kind of 3 more slides. Pass that down.
Can you send one back? You send it back to Joe, it's gonna go around, we need one more.
Yeah, we need one more there.
The CIP process is basically to evaluate each of these requests and prioritize them in a way, and then forward that to the town council as advice to the town council. CIP process has no, like the budget committee, no teeth other than a recommendation. Yes, no, or change the numbers. But since the town is using leasing, I'm going to give you the example in the fire department. Fire department put in a request for $48,000 a year for a pumper. Now what that amounts to is that is really the lease payments for that pumper. It's on a 10-year lease, I believe, and it was acquired in 2021 as a capital expenditure, as a piece of capital equipment. So we have a request then from the fire department for $48,000 in the current fiscal year, and that really isn't a request to put stuff into reserve fund. It's a request to pay the capital cost of this piece of equipment. So if we go to the next page, you'll see that in the capital reserve recommendations from CIP, they said $68,000 as a recommendation. Because that is the sum of the $48,000 for the pumper plus $20,000 to go into a capital reserve fund for SCBA's, which I think are some sort of breathing apparatus, which have to be required to be replaced periodically. And it's planned to replace them in 2028. So we've been salting away money, $20,000 a year. Now, when you looked at the town manager's budget that he submitted to the town council last Saturday, he put $50,000 into the fire department capital reserve number. And in fact, if you go back historically, the previous slide shows you that that was the number in 18, 19, 20. In other words, we've been putting $50,000 a year into fire department capital, independent of what has been requested. The problem is now that this year, the fire department will spend $48,000 on their lease, leaving only $2,000 to accumulate towards the SCBA's replacements. In other words, we're getting ourselves into a position where that we are not properly funding capital items. And if in order to use these devices beyond 2028 or 2029, whenever it is that they expire, we're going to be faced with buying them without the capital funds to do so. The second thing is that if you look at the first page that I gave you, you will see that in 25-26, the fire department's looking at another $49,000 more in their capital line. That is an anticipated lease of a tanker. So you can see that now the department heads are finding that, gee, leasing is a pretty neat deal. But what the town is going to see is, historically, we've been putting $50,000 into fire department capital. We'll put $50,000 in this year. Except in 25 and 26, it's got to be over $90,000 unless we want to give up our pumper. And I can tell you we don't want to give up our pumper, number one, and number two is if the town ever effectively defaults or returns a piece of equipment because of non-appropriation, it will be very hard for the town to ever lease anything again. So it's not a required commitment, but it's such a strong implied commitment. And the problem is that this is, I don't think the town council is aware of this, and it's their budget that we end up deliberating on. So I think it's important that we look at this budget that we will get in November, because I think our capital problems are going to get a lot worse.
I think it's worse than what we have here, because years ago, I was a firefighter. Typical life cycle on a truck was at least 20 years. And what we're saying here is we're essentially spending the entire value of the truck on a 10-year lease, and then you're handing the truck in unless we're buying the truck at the end of the lease.
We own it.
No, we own it at the end of the lease.
We own it at the end? All right.
Yeah, we will own it. So in fact, at the end of 10 years, that line item goes away, and we still own the
So we
truck.
still have the asset.
But
Okay.
between now and then, we're going to be faced with much higher capital costs because we have traditionally underfunded capital. And when we go through the request for capital, there is some $400,000, $500,000 in various projects for this building. And, like top pointing the brick and the roof as well as wiring. There's still knob and tube wiring live in this building. Things like that, that, you know, we're never putting enough money into the capital reserve is not there. We've been putting dribs and drabs in. And generally, most of the capital funds, if you look at it historically, you know, if they had $50,000 in it 10 years ago, they have $55,000 in it this year. We've just kind of been putting something in and then taking it out, you know.
So this seems like a bad practice for a bunch of reasons. You know, we're gonna create fixed costs, essentially, lease payments that we can't not pay. So where it looks like we're contributing to capital reserves, we're really paying fixed lease payments, we have no other choice to pay, just to deplete any other money. Plus, there's gotta be a cost for these leases, you know, it's a way to finance, basically.
Right.
So, and we're doing this because that's their only way to go get the piece of equipment they need, because we've underfunded
That's
the capital
correct.
reserves. So, I'm just curious, as a budget committee, you know, what wherewithal do we have to influence a process like that? Because that's a bad
The only thing we can actually do is we can propose a bottom line budget and, you know, make a suggestion to the town manager as to where they add money or change, take away money.
So-
But, you can't do individual line items, number one. Number two, the change that we make, I believe is only, I may be wrong, 10% of
10% of the
the budget, proposed budget either way.
So we can't make a recommendation to increase funding for capital reserves of any significance.
We can make a bottom line number and say, we suggest that this new amount, that you use X amount of dollars for this, you know, make that number one. Number two, again, it's, I believe we can only increase it by up to 10%.
Yeah, because to Roger's point, if you project out, the chickens are gonna come home to roost on this at some point.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, that's exactly it. And I think that, you know, we don't have the ability to, we can recommend back to the town council, you know, add more money. Here's what we think you need to do. But what we can do is we can make noise about this. We can, you know, generate a recommendation to the town manager that we either, you know, change the process or limit ourselves on leasing or whatever we decide we would like to recommend. He can say, go pound sand, but the fact is that I think it will mean something to the town and the town council if the budget committee said something.
Yeah, because what you're illustrating is something that someone might think is a proposed capital reserve contribution, but it's really not.
That's exactly
It's a
right.
fixed payment that we're obligated to that we can't pay.
And when the town council reviewed the budget with the town manager on Saturday, when the fire department came up, there was no comment whatsoever, no, you know, question as to why where the 50,000, why 50,000? I mean, historically, it's been 50,000, and I'll bet you that if I ask the town council individuals, if they realize that 48 of that is committed,
It's $2,000 we're making. That's
They-
what we're really doing.
that I don't think they did, and not because they're dumb. That isn't what I mean. What I mean is it's not transparent. It's not visible. And unless you go and dig into the CIP report and compare it and look back and figure out that these line items are lease payments, because it doesn't say they're lease payments, it says this is what we'd like to have you put into the capital reserve. So,
You taking this back to?
so that's, I think, I just don't want us to get into a problem, because it's, you know, the 25, 26 problem in the fire department is gonna,
No, I get it, I'm just
I'm happy to come and
Yeah,
explain.
I just figured you better to have it come from, you're the one who caught it, you're the ones who should,
I would think there's a cost for a non-appropriation clause, just in the cost of the lease, even though we may never
course.
do it. They must have to presume something to put in there for them.
I suspect they do, but they probably historically have almost never been caught with that. Because it probably makes a difference on what you're renting or what you're leasing, but, if it's the principal firefighting equipment, towns aren't gonna default on that.
We definitely should talk to the town manager to understand it better, I think, before making any assumptions. I mean, if you look at 10-year funding, $48,000, $480,000, where the cost for replacement is listed $600,000.
Right.
So,
Well, it may be a
so
15-year.
apparently we're seeing the same.
No, it may be a 15-year lease then,
Maybe, yeah.
yeah.
But
Because fire equipment has long lifetimes. I mean, we run them 20 to 25 years.
but I suspect the town manager is aware of.
I think the town manager may be aware of it, although it didn't look so when I looked at his capital reserve recommendations, so.
Okay, if they go into a lease agreement, they have to make payments, right? Or 48,000 to fund,
Yeah.
48,000 to fund 9,000, okay? Really, all this is doing them is forcing them to fund at 100% the capital reserve, which they traditionally underfund.
Correct.
So is that really an issue of, forcing you to?
Because if we end up funding the major capital acquisitions in fire, police, and public works, equipment acquisitions by lease payments, and we don't recognize, we might get ourselves into a forced situation. What I'm concerned about is building maintenance, other capital programs that need to be funded will end up suffering. Because you can't lease a playground it's a school but you can't lease a park. If you need a capital expenditure for a building, you can't do a full payout lease.
So what you're saying is in a situation like the lease item would get the money, and whether it's not, the things are not leased, end up without the money, correct?
Yeah. So that's the worry, because we'll get ourselves into a situation, gosh, we can't increase the budget, but we can't, so what are we gonna do? We're gonna slide out the things we can slide out, which are not leased.
I guess my thought on it is, going along with Gary, maybe we need to have some more information from Steve. He's coming here November 29th, correct?
Yeah.
Why don't we make that part of our discussion with him, get an explanation?
That's a perfect time to do it,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. But I'm saying before we go to the town council, before, trying to avoid the surprise scenario.
Well, by the time he comes here, the town council has approved the budget. Okay?
Yeah.
That may be one thing.
Good. Because I don't know,
Before the 29th.
I don't know what the lease is, what the budget is that we will see.
I see.
I know what the town manager gave to the town council as his recommendation. The town council, probably hasn't completed their deliberations on them. And they may change those numbers, so it may or may not be. But at the current time, the best information, all I know is that,
Roger,
we can get ourselves into a problem.
just looking at the numbers here, this pumper, year acquired, 2021, do we physically have that piece of equipment now? And are we currently making lease payments on this?
I believe it is either now or it's ordered. It's either here or it's,
Okay, so, yeah, well, that's what I'm alluding to. So, I mean, my concern also is, like you say, in fiscal year 25, 26, you're adding on another $49K. But then if you take a look, 4 years later, you're starting to replace L2 at $800,000 expense. So that gets added to, now you're paying 3
Right.
units in 1 year.
And, you know, you can take that out of the reserve fund, I mean, that we end up funding at $2,000 a year. Is it not gonna work? That's the whole point.
Is there a significant reserve right now that they could put away for some of this equipment that?
It says 87,000.
Yeah, I was gonna look, I think there's 80-some thousand dollars in.
Not nearly enough.
No. And the SCBA equipment, we have in 5 years, 6 years,
Yeah, it'll
$120,000
It'll eat that up
plus
and then
87 is still short of the 240 that's required.
Yep.
So, you know, we've got to start putting more money in.
Well, you need to build a true reserve. Right now, you don't have a reserve.
That's right.
You just got a fund that you're using for monthly
It's-
payment.
Yeah,
This is the opposite of having a reserve, because as it mounts, you're gonna have big bills in the future without a reserve.
yeah. So you know, I don't have necessarily a great solution. I mean, raising the budget isn't great, but.
Is that the case in other reserve funds? Have you come across in other areas?
Yeah, we're gonna see it in Public Works. Again,
So it's just
these
those
are,
under reserve, police, fire, and public works. those
yeah,
things.
no, police is saying effectively, that has been going on for a long time, basically buying 1 car a year. And that's kind of built into their budget, and that's okay.
That's out of their general fund, that's not capital reserve, that's general, every year. but
Well-
It's an operating.
They've taken, yes, in that case, they've been putting it into the budget so it's general fund. So, you know, because they revolve it each year, they're using general fund.
So it'll be fire, public works, and sewer. If you want to separate.
Public Works is another.
Yeah.
Roger,
Water, sewer.
in regards to Public Works, for example, with their dump/plow sander trucks, they've got them all listed at 150,000. How recent are those numbers? I mean, did someone go out and price out a vehicle in the last 12 months?
My guess is that they've priced it out within the last couple of years. And
Okay,
those
because
prices-
there are substantial increases on
Uh,
that type of
Absolutely,
equipment.
depending on what happens here over the next 12 or 18 months.
If you can even get them.
Right. And, you know,
Yeah.
So,
so,
thinking out loud here, if they were to move these items into their general fund budget, okay, today you have, the default budget is your contractual obligations, what you did
Yeah.
last year, plus your contractual obligations.
well, but these are not contractual obligations for a default budget, because they are non-appropriation. They don't add to the default budget.
If it was part of their general fund,
Still-
and they say that this lease is a contractual obligation.
In subsequent, you're saying in subsequent years.
Right, yes, well, yeah, I guess that's what that
Yes, that's true. I guess, yes.
status of.
I don't know.
It probably depends on what problem you're trying to fix. You're trying to ensure the default budget can meet our obligations, then it might, you're trying to fix the problem of funding, or the possible problem of funding, then it doesn't really affect it.
Okay, yeah, interesting.
So, that is basically, you know, the process, by the way, is a good process. And, you know, I really strongly, I know you wanted to be on it.
I'm curious, I saw that the capital improvement program committee came up with a number that was significantly higher than what had been requested.
No, not,
Or what Steve approved.
oh, what Steve recommended, yes, considerably.
And what's the big difference?
The,
Annual tradition show.
$107,000 difference. Or 107%, sorry.
So ultimately, you recommended for the 22-23 year, $590. Right?
for the, no, 590 was the school number. It was 1951 for the town, almost 2 million. And the town manager's budget. I can find the right page.
Well, offhand, do you recall what the significant,
Hmm?
offhand, do you recall what the significant differences would be?
Pretty generally across the board. Almost everything is up. Capital reserve, the town manager recommended 519,000. So about 25% of the requests. Now, some of those requests are things that are, they're not necessities, they're desires. But definitely 519 is,
Is it 5 million?
519,000.
the department heads proposed 1.3, and Steve cut that to 519.
And the CIP program recommended what? Did you post it?
1950, something like that. Well, that was, but that includes a lot of desire, I don't have it.
Water and sewer capital funded through the enterprise fund?
Pardon?
Is the water and sewer capital for water and sewer, is that come through enterprise money?
That is all enterprise money.
Yeah.
So I consider the enterprise funds to be, that's an in-out sort of thing. That's managed as a business, and they're doing a damn good job of it.
They're
So,
self-funding their capital.
yeah, they fund all, they have the good capital reserves. The capital reserves there are very healthy. So, because they've been, they're running the business well.
Any other questions for Roger? Are you going to attend the town council meeting, or you want to wait until you get to see?
Whatever, if they ask me to come, I will come.
Well, I'll ask you to come, I guess. I'm asking you to come.
Okay. Tell me when.
All right, next meeting should be the first Wednesday of next month, so that would be, double check. Yep, the 3rd.
Pardon?
The 3rd?
November 3rd?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When is that? What time?
Oh, 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. Okay?
No, this sounds like a fairly, serious thing that can impact the town's future for years, so probably better to get ahead of it now before it becomes a monster, I guess is the best way to say it. Well, it's not the best way to say it, but it's the way I said it, so.
Okay.
I don't know what the actual protocol is, but you may have to put it on the agenda that you will have a guest speaker that you are
Yeah.
inviting
Yeah.
to speak to. Does the school do that? How does the school handle that?
Don't know, I've never invited speakers.
School is not,
I, no one's ever asked me to.
I don't think school has done any leasing,
No.
because there's, their programs are more project-oriented.
I just wondered if you as a board member.
I've never done that with
Yeah. I'll check with Steve, make sure I'm following protocol. This is my first time doing this, so,
Yeah,
we'll learn together.
yeah. Let me know.
Next agenda item is the approval of the minutes for September 27th. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to accept.
A second?
Second.
Any comments on it? Conversations? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Next, any other business? We got, so everybody's invited to, there's a Zoom meeting, an online Zoom meeting related to
Climate change.
water, as I before. Everybody else, I sent out that notice to everybody that is invited to attend if they want. Do you have any other business?
Guess I'll just remind the public of a special meeting, this Saturday, 9 a.m.
Okay. Now, this is people come here and they're actually gonna vote on it. Is that, it's not a ballot vote, it's a
I think it must be a voice vote,
the deliberative type session.
yeah, that they haven't.
And I noticed on the article that they didn't say anything about recommended by the budget.
I noticed that, and
That-
I was disappointed not to see that, but I noticed that as well.
That's fine. It's fine. Again, just wanted the budget committee to go on record this, in support of it. 6 1, half dozen the other. Either we pay the money now, with the funds they can get, or, we give it back to the taxpayers a couple of months down the road, or a year or two, come back with the money again,
Yep.
even more money at that potential time. So, I personally have no problem. Any other questions?
Just one thing, I actually just want to thank Roger for his work with the CIP. I think, what you brought to us this evening enlightens everyone, and hopefully we can get a better understanding of it, or the town council or whoever can get a better understanding as to what the ramifications are of doing it this way. So thank you, Roger.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion.
Ryan?
Second?